We're going to be joined by 5 incredible learning leaders who are going to be discussing how we can build the skills and leaders for the future now. So to do this, I'm joined by Dave Cushen, Chief Learning Officer at Anglo American, Sergio Fasce, Chief Learning Officer at Nokia, Andrew Johnson, Chief Learning Officer at Eskom, Monique Timmermans, Director of Learning and OD at Shell, and Matthew Smith, Chief Learning Officer at McKinsey & Company. Welcome, everyone. How are you all?
Very good. Thank you, Chris.
All good. Thanks, Chris.
Very well.
First session of the day, no pressure.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Set the bar high.
Yes, thanks all for being here, and it's been incredible to have everyone here, and the fact that you're all tuning in from different parts of the world always makes it even more interesting. Before we jump in, just take a quick second to kind of introduce yourselves. I'll start with yourself, Monique.
So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everybody. I support the leadership of one of the largest supply divisions globally in the energy sector. We move and sell actually every energy commodity you can think of, where people and systems are unique differentiators. I am the organizational development and learning, heading up the practice, and I focus mainly on enhancing performance from an individual leadership and organizational perspective.
Amazing. Thanks, Monique. Sergio?
I'm Sergio Fasce. I lead the learning and development organization in Nokia. We take care from leadership to soft skills to technical to product kind of training. And I serve my employees, I serve my customers and my channel partners to provide the best knowledge possible to succeed in their job.
Amazing. Thank you, Sergio. Andrew?
Hello, everybody. And thanks, Chris, for the invitation. My name is Andrew Johnson. I head up the Academy of Learning for Eskom, which is the electricity provider for South Africa. My own speciality is actually leadership development, and that's a kind of area that I've researched in myself and also teach on programs at the Academy. The Academy is organized around 3 faculties. We do technical training, which is all the engineering and artisan, functional, which is your business skills like customer service, IT, and so forth. And then the Leadership Development Center, which obviously provide leadership development from first line to executive for Eskom.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks for joining us all the way from South Africa as well.
Yes,
Great to have you with us. David?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I head up the learning team at Anglo American, one of the world's largest mining companies, operating across a number of geographies, particularly in Latin America, majority in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and Australia, and a number of other countries, covering a range of commodities and base metals, including De Beers. People hopefully familiar with our diamond business as well. And
it cost me a lot of money. You have, David.
Delighted to be here. Cover all the range of activities across the learning function, 10 different businesses, about 85,000 people. So I'm happy to join in the discussion today.
Wow. And last but not least, Matt.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again, Chris, for convening this great group of people here today. So my name is Matt Smith. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at McKinsey & Company. We're a global management consulting firm. We're present in over 70 countries around the world. And what my team and I have the honor to do is look after the learning and development strategy and all of our learning programs that cover 32,000 colleagues globally, both sort of traditional consulting skills, which is what I think a lot of people know McKinsey for, but also teaching technical skills. We now have over 5,000 technologists who work at McKinsey and many other new capabilities that we've had to learn how to cover over the last few years. So very excited to join in the conversation today.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for the introductions. I thought it would be a bit more helpful for everyone to get more of a perspective of your background. So I really appreciate that. Andrew, I'm going to throw the first question over to yourself. Let's talk about how has the impact of COVID-19 accelerated the uptake of digital learning within your organization?
Thanks, Chris. I think 2 years ago, when I spoke to my team about the necessity for us to really step into the space of digital learning, I think people weren't really fully understanding what I was saying. And at the time, we were talking about it, obviously, within the context of 4IR, as to the challenges that would be generated by that, and the need for us to transform our learning. And I think what has happened with COVID is that what I've tried to say to my team was just kind of pushing the whole thing right into their faces, because we had to close down the academy, partly because we have large numbers of people coming to the academy for learning. And for the last 6 months, we've been operating obviously from home. And in some ways, what it did was really all the things I've been saying previously to my team was right in their faces, because they still had to deliver the learning to the organization. And yet we couldn't do it in classroom setups. Currently, for example, our classroom training is still making up about 88% of our delivery. Only a small portion of about 9% is online learning. And what it has done, it has just kind of pushed it right into people's faces. And I was quite pleasantly surprised, I must say, by how well the team had taken it up in terms of doing that learning online. And I put up a very firm and a good small team of people to really begin to advance the digital learning for us, because some of the technical training obviously still had to happen, partly because our guys in the power stations have to be licensed to operate certain type of machinery and so on, and these licenses expire because they obviously have normally like a year-long validity, but after that you have to retrain and to be relicensed. And so we moved into that space. So what the kind of things that we started doing much more of was things like, for example, simulations, whereby we were able to put simulations online for our people to learn. And not just the old static type of learning. It was very much interactive, because we had to move into that space where it's also exciting to people to interact with the learning online and not just listen to somebody, talking about a particular piece of learning. And I think in that regard, it really helped the guys do things quite new and interesting things in terms of this type of learning. Because I think what COVID did was simply to say, if you haven't thought about this before, now you have to do it. And I think that was probably the biggest lesson in terms of moving that online training much faster forward to what we've been trying to do over 2 years. I must confess that from our point of view, we're still very much in a very strong learning curve around digital learning. But I'm also comforted by the fact that I've put up a team to just purely focus on how do we transform our traditional classroom learning into much more digital space. We, for example, just next week, I'll be doing a leadership program with some of our general managers and senior managers, the first time that we're doing this online with them. So it's going to be a very interesting experience where we start off this program with them. In this regard, we'll be using MS Teams to do their training, but we've also created, like breakaway sessions from that, where people can work with a particular facilitator much more in depth on the different themes that we will be talking about there. I do regard some of that learning not fully complementing, obviously, what is required within leadership learning. I think in some instances there might still be requirements for people to actually connect physically with each other. Obviously, with all the safety protocols, we will try that out at some point, where people need to interact and talk to each other, because the online obviously creates its own challenges in terms of that. But that's what we have tried to do this. The soft skills training has been quite easy to do that, and we have converted quite a lot of our material into online training, even things like a critical aspect for us around safety training. We are able to do that online.
Yeah, fantastic, Andrew.
Chris, if I could jump on this theme as well, because something that Andrew said really resonated with me, which is you use the words pleasantly surprised, and I think that's a bit the tagline of this period for us as well, which is, I think, like your organization, Andrew, and probably many of ours, we had to convert a portfolio that was happening mostly through traditional methods into a fully digital or virtual environment very quickly. And it's not as if it was a new idea. We had been, like you, Andrew, trying to push it for years now and get people more used to doing things digitally, but there just was so much resistance from the organization, and certainly a perception that digital was just a pale comparison of the experience you could get in person. And I think what we found is, while it's not fully the same, there are some things that you lose or you miss. People really are pleasantly surprised by how good the experience can be, how deep you can actually go, how much you can connect, and really some things that you couldn't necessarily do if you were bringing people together into a learning center or other physical space. And so, it's been, I think, pleasantly surprising all of us, just not just that we could transfer the portfolio to digital, but actually that people are really enjoying the experience more than we thought they were going to.
Absolutely.
So when I hear you
the
both,
discussion, I think.
Go for it, Monique. Sergio,
yeah, so,
if I can join in.
So if I hear Andrew and Matt, you're talking about transforming an existing portfolio. What I also see is a shift. So if you think about the 70, 20, 10%, 17% is learning on the job, 20% is in communities and in coaching, and 10% is the formal learning. What I actually see happening in our business is that there is a shift from the formal learning to more the communities and to a coaching type of session. So besides transforming something to more digital, there's also much more a need for the performance support on the job. And I see an increasing need for, and we are setting that up in communities and in coaching type of sessions. So also that shift is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I like the idea, Monique, about communities, because I think people used to talk in the past about these communities of practice, and it very much now that is what it is. It's communities of practice, but in a virtual space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you alluded already to it, Andrew, MS Teams, right? MS Teams normally would take us maybe years to implement, but it was incredible in a few months. We had it all rolled out across the whole business.
Quite, yeah. I'm
interested, David and Monique, you both had similar sort of previous roles at Shell. And I know Shell were pretty kind of, I'd say advanced, but further along than many companies. Have you taken some of those learnings over? I'm sorry, obviously you're still there, Monique, but I mean, David used to be there as well. Have you taken some of those similar learnings over at Shell? What have you kind of taken away?
Yeah, I can share some of those experiences.
Yeah.
I just wanted to recognize Sergio was trying to come back on a point there, and then I'll share some of my learnings from my time at Shell.
Great.
Sergio?
Can you hear us now, Sergio? I know we lost you a minute ago. Can you hear us okay?
Oh, I hear you very well. Unfortunately, it seems that there's some problem with the connection. We are a telco company. This is exactly what is happening in a telecom company. No, so apart of the joke, what I wanted to share with you is the thinking. We also had a big shift. We deliver more or less 5 million hours of training per year. And this year we will reach 96% digital enabled. When I say digital enabled, is either e-learning or virtual instructor led. And I think that we will never come back, because I see exactly also in our customer the reluctance to start, but a great appreciation as soon as they experience. And I think that with the introduction of 5G as the new nectar, the new platform, we will be able to have a much more immersive and engaging kind of digital solution that will help a lot in the future. So I see a sort of acceleration. Probably we will have a blended environment at the end of the COVID, but we will not come back for sure as it was before.
Yeah, so Chris, for me, I recently joined Anglo in the summer, right in the middle of lockdown. They shipped me a laptop, and I've not left this room. So it's been a very interesting experience, both onboarding and learning a new company and a new role in the middle of a global pandemic. But certainly the experience of having worked at Shell for many years was very helpful, because we had been investing in immersive technologies and simulation-based learning for many years. And that was also, not just driven by an overall drive of virtualizing learning, which had been happening for many, many years, but recognizing that you could rehearse abnormal situations and manage risk in environments that were increasingly easier to develop virtual simulation type immersive experiences. Shell, like Anglo, like Eskom, a technical company. 80% of the people that as I've joined Anglo, I realize 80% of the people that work here wear PPE every day and do difficult, dangerous jobs, driving, operating large equipment or in dangerous locations. So safety is of paramount importance. And as Andrew was saying, if you weren't already driving a virtualization of your learning agenda 12 months ago, and then absolutely you are today. And as Monique was saying, I'd never used Microsoft Teams 6 months ago. I'd never heard of the word Zoom in terms of a technology 6 months ago. But those two things combined have actually probably, as Matt was saying, that if people weren't comfortable and accepting of virtual engagement and virtual collaboration, then we are now, because it's become the new norm.
On that point, I'd love to hear again for yourself, David, about one of the big challenges I'm seeing leaders face or companies face is developing leaders that can lead and operate in this new environment and also in this new disruptive world that we're living in. How are you approaching that, and in terms of giving your leaders the support that they need to lead in this new virtual environment that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, there's, if people didn't understand what VUCA meant 12 months ago, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, this is where we are now living, and that has accelerated at a pace. I think many of the things around leadership development, I'll be curious from Andrew's, expertise in this in particular. Some of those things haven't changed, whether you're an advocate of Drucker or Arbinger or whatever your particular leadership philosophy. Many of those things are unchanged when it comes to leadership of self. But it's actually the leadership in the context of your role that has changed. And that context is fundamentally different. One of the experiences I had previously that I recognize as well at Anglo is there were too many layers of leadership development happening. So it was, today you need, commercial leadership, safety leadership, operational leadership, ethical leadership, integrative leadership. There was all these layers of leadership being sprayed at individuals that it was just too much. So I think when you filter it down to, what is it about leading self and leading in the context of your role, and it's that context that makes it makes that uniqueness. So the difference now is we understand the context of digital, the context of ambiguity, the context of disruption. All of those things drive a need for leaders to really be clear on purpose and vision. Make sure that's aligned with where the company or the business is trying to go. Agility is much more important. Ability to manage risk and be tolerant of risk and have confidence to learn and adapt, and overall self-awareness. So, as I said, I think many of the foundation principles, whatever your particular philosophy is around leadership, remain unchanged. But it's understanding the difference between leaders themselves versus the context in which they operate in. Yeah.
Maybe just to add to what David is saying on leadership, one of the things that I was looking at in particular was, so how did the whole environment change how we think about leadership? And I read a very interesting piece by Professor Sohail Inayatullah. He heads up the future desk of UNESCO. And one of the scenarios that he paints around the world that we're operating in, which I then utilize as a kind of metaphor, how we could speak about leadership, was that he said that what the lockdown did in particular to us was to push us into a space where we needed to pause. But it wasn't just a pause about, like, for example, we would say it's slowing down in order to speed up. Because he said the problem with that was that just speeding up meant that we might have just taken all the things that we were doing pre-lockdown and speed up the same old stuff. So he spoke about it as a pause in order to transform. And that for me was a very important thing to think about. So the question then was, how would you help leaders to think differently about this new world? And very much what David is talking about, because COVID really just put us very much in the middle of what we've been talking about for a long time, this VUCA world that we find ourselves in. And COVID just kind of accelerated that in a bigger sense. And so the question would have then be, how do you think about leadership when you find yourself in this space where you are so deeply disrupted in terms of how you think about the world, your work, and so forth? And for me, it was about how we transform about leading yourself, how do you transform leading others, and how you transform leading your organization. And for me, just 3 questions that I'd like to share around it. For me, about the leading self was, how are you as a leader going to be purposefully calm in the storm? Secondly, leading others, how could you lead other people without position? In other words, you have to depend very much on your personal power as a leader. How have you transformed yourself in stepping into the space of others? And thirdly, for me, it's about leading the organization was, do you have the ability to zoom in on the nitty-gritty problems of your organization and zoom out and see a bigger picture of what does this all mean for your organization? And that, just finally to say, required for me, I think, leaders having had to have a very serious mindset shift in how they step up into this new paradigm, because I fear that what will happen is that leaders just step up to what is a very new world that we are facing with exactly the old paradigms and recipes that might have been successful last year, but no longer going to be successful in this new world.
Yeah. I love that framing, Andrew, and also the questions resonate a lot. I wonder, one other aspect of it that we've been looking at as well is adaptability. Because I think one thing that we're seeing a lot of people just, even pre-COVID struggle with is, as business models transform, there's still this sense of like, when is the transformation going to be done? And still that, like, when will things go back to normal, or we'll kind of get through this and then it'll be smooth sailing. And then similarly, as we've gone into the COVID times, there's a sense of like, okay, we've got to hunker down and get through this, and then someday it's going to be quote unquote back to normal. And I think one thing we're placing an increasing emphasis on here in terms of what we teach to our own people and also in the work that we do with clients is some of the meta skills around learning agility, adaptability, ability to kind of face new types of challenges with, as you said, I love the kind of being the calm in the storm, but also being able to pivot multiple times with a recognition that it's not about getting through a transformation or an event or a crisis, but more, how do you build the muscle to constantly adapt to whatever is going to come your way?
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I could no more agree with my previous speakers on leading self and others. There's one thing which we see when you want to lead a business, which is a critical skill in the part of the business where I sit, is collaboration, enabling collaboration. Leaders need to be in a position to enable that collaboration. And why is that? Is because problems become more complex. We need to create value more across multiple different teams. That means that leaders need to be in a position to enable collaboration between different parts of the organizations to create that value or to find the solutions. And the way we look at it has 2 components. We want leaders to be, from a personal perspective, skill set, be able to do that, create an inclusive environment, be able to step in the shoes of other businesses and think what they need, but also create a safe space to speak up and make mistakes. And on the other side, also bringing in the right conditions to do that through performance assessment, through role clarity, through enterprise first agreements. So basically, enabling that collaboration, we see that as a critical skill for leaders in the future.
Feel free to jump in.
Maybe just one final comment, Chris. It was a discussion that came up in my team yesterday. We were talking about, I grew up in Ireland, and there's a phrase they use when they say hello, they say, how are you? And it doesn't actually mean how are you, it just means hello. And I think what you've seen differently and the need in the future for leaders and organizations more generally is this need of genuine care because of what people are going through and this blurring of work and life and home life and physical well-being and mental health. That has all become very, very real in the last 12 months. So increasingly we're saying, how are you? And I'm not saying hello, I'm saying, how are you? And that's a really important part of leading in the future that we've experienced in the last 12 months. So
yeah, definitely agree with you on that. Matt, from your perspective, I know something you're always focusing on is kind of the looking at, I think we've already mentioned, talking about focusing on the present, but also having a mind on the future as well. How well do you think the L&D function is focusing on the future? Do you think that our current learning function have the right skills and focus to make those fundamental differences that we need for both the individual and the organization?
I think it's the perennial challenge of leadership is how do you do both at the same time? So my former boss said being a leader meant you had a telescope in one eye and a microscope in the other, and you needed to somehow be able to zoom in at a super deep level on the day-to-day while also seeing out to the horizon and what's coming next. But the thing is, if you've ever tried to do that, it can get a little disorienting, and you tend to have one eye closed while you're looking through the other one. So my sense of it is, I think we've been probably rightly so a little microscope oriented this year, if I could speak in broad generalizations, which is that we've had a enormous world crisis that has affected every part of almost every institution in the world and every country in the world. And we as learning and development leaders have had to very rapidly adapt to that along the lines of what we were talking about in the first part of this panel. I do think that the opportunity that we have now is to think about how do we build off of where we are in 2020 as we get into the next couple of years to prepare much better for the future. Because even as we've maybe been oriented around what do we need to do to rapidly digitize everything we're doing or roll out new formats or make sure we're covering urgent and emerging needs like mental health, I think we've also set some foundations around, for example, the use of digital new formats. We've talked about very briefly simulations and other types of things that people may not have been used to experiencing before. So I do think we have some foundations in place, but we're trying to pivot a lot over the next few months within my team is how do we now get a little bit out of the managing through the day-to-day, week-to-week stuff of getting through this crazy year to thinking about the long term. And when I think about what are those shifts that L&D has to make, I think there's a couple. And it starts with taking a mindset of we're always the ones telling other people that they need to reskill and they need to prepare for the future. And we also have to look in the mirror on that and say, what skills do we have in our organizations, and are they the right ones for 2025 or beyond? And in my mind, you're still always going to need some core skills around people who really understand learning design in an adult learning context. You're going to need some foundational linkages to broader parts of the HR and people ecosystem, people who really understand the business. I think you're going to need a lot more digital and technical talent in learning. I think if we want to make truly personalized learning a reality, I think we just need people who have the skills to actually, know how to design the right systems and processes to make that real. I also think we need a lot more analytics. So beyond sort of digital delivery, I think really getting much smarter about what's working, what's not, what's having impact, and using that to then feed into what's teed up and feed into what we're designing and what we're deploying. Those are skills that it's not that we don't have any people who know how to do that, but if you were to take kind of a 5-year out view and say, what do we think our learning organization needs to look like in 5 years? What's the mix of skills? There's probably, at least in my organization and probably in most others as well, some gap there. And I'd be curious to hear what the other panelists think about that. But I think there is kind of a need to, start pivoting towards thinking about that long-term shift now.
So I can build up
I
on that.
agree 100% with the...
Go ahead, Sergio.
Sorry? Okay.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I wanted to say that I agree 100%. I agree 100% with Matt, and I think that we first need to look at ourselves in a mirror and see what we're missing. And I also think that we need to, in some way, contaminate a bit our organization, attracting talents from other organizations with different skills to not only bring digital skills, AR, VR, or whatever is needed, but also to bring a bit of different perspective about how to help the people to drive their own development. Because I fully convinced that the responsibility of the development of the people should be first individuals. They should have the curiosity and the willingness to improve, because this is the only way to stay competitive as an employee, as a person. So I agree with you, and I think we need to open up more to attract different people and to be successful.
So if I build upon Matt, what you were saying, so a couple of years ago, we merged organizational development and learning together in one team. And that actually opened the opportunity not only to look at individual skill sets, but really look at how can we enhance the performance as an organization as a whole. And in the business I am working, at the same time, a couple of years ago, we had future challenges. So we saw trends, our energy transition, digital, but also the competitive environment became much more high demanding. This led to a strong collaboration between the ODL community, organizational development learning community, and strategy. So we used that momentum to position that as an integrated approach to the businesses, where you think about where you want to go, but also at the same time, where do you need to be really good at? So we undertook an exercise with strategy, where we reached out to customers, suppliers, and employees to draft our ambitions, and at the same time to think about what we really need to excel at to outperform the competition. So to give you an example, one of our ambitions is to be the leader provider of cleaner energy solutions and making money. That meant that we really need to be good at advanced trading. And that led to a second strong collaboration across the businesses, because the way we looked at capability was not only skills only of people, but also the IT and the tools, etc. they needed. So if you think about advanced trading, it's real-time analysis, it's automated execution, it's a better balance between traders and analysts, it's about power as skills for traders. So we formed multidisciplinary teams with IT, with processes, to basically build the capability. So based on my experience, there are actually three things from the experience we have. So if you have an opportunity to set up an integrated approach with strategy, that will drive that future longer term picture. It's important to get the right momentum with the business, because you need to hook it on into a problem or a challenge they have. And ultimately, the design and the delivery is happening of these capabilities through multidisciplinary teams, where learning, talent is part of it, with IT and process.
Love it. And I think more important, more now than ever, Monique, we're seeing that collaboration happening online. And I also think that because we're operating virtually, I'm seeing more collaboration now. Now we're breaking those boundaries of an office environment. I'm not sure if any of you are seeing that. I'm seeing now that we're in this virtual environment, more and more people are collaborating because you're not confined to a particular office or a particular location. I'm seeing teams, sometimes they're forced to do so because of current events to come together, but I'm seeing a lot more collaboration happening across the organizations. Is that something you're all seeing?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's just a situation that kind of forces people into that space. And they have to now find different ways of, I can't just walk across to somebody's office and collaborate with the person or get advice. I have to now actually get online and to be in touch with it. I must just say that I think the people do struggle with that because there is this kind of human touch that they miss quite a lot. I hear that quite a lot from my own team. And maybe just to latch on to what Matt said earlier about how we ourselves have to shift. It is, we obviously are building programs and initiatives to help the organization to shift. But I was always clear to my team that we have to have our own change program because we can't step into helping others to shift with the old mindsets for ourselves. We have to shift our own particular mindset. And so we've always run in parallel to us doing the new programs and implementing those. We have run parallel to that, a change program for ourselves. One of the big questions we had to, for example, as part of our program now to deal with is just to try and understand what is this new world that we are facing in the workplace. And now in the coming weeks, what we're going to do is to work on the skills that we as the practitioners within that learning and development space, what are the skills that we require in order to do this better for the organization? Which means we have to check our own mindset. We have to deal with issues like agility, adaptability, resilience. What do those things mean? Because when we step out in the space of others to help them build the skills around that, how well have we helped ourselves, first of all, in order to make that shift real for ourselves?
And Chris, I mean, I don't mind sharing that. I found it a challenge. Yeah, I really have. You say it's easier to collaborate with people, but you know, I moved into a new role in the summer. I've only ever been operating in this type of environment for the last 4 or 5 months. I've known Monique for 15 years. She knows I'm, you know, very comfortable working in global virtual environments. I've done it all my life, but there's been something about this more linear experience that I've found particularly challenging. You come to a new role, what do you want to do? You want to get people in a room, get around the whiteboard, get creative. I think the other thing that this has changed is the spontaneity, as Andrew says, of running into someone in the office in a coffee machine, and that spontaneity of saying, yeah, hey, there's some creativity that we're missing here. If you look at your diary in the morning and then you get to the end of the day, that's exactly what happens, you know, because your diary is set out for you and you finish your day and nothing strange happened. So there's something you have to do to break that cycle. And how do you find spontaneity? How do you find creativity in a day when it's so structured and so linear? That's something we've been losing this year. And as I said, I don't mind saying I've struggled with it.
Yeah. I think my point I was making as well is it just basically, I struggle with that too. And I think many people are the same, David. I think the point I was making is that because we're not located in an office, people can get involved in some of those meetings that perhaps they would have been in before. To that point, though, what you mentioned, something I've started doing, which a number of CHROs mentioned to me, and that they did, is they're trying to recreate those moments. So something I've been doing in my team is just sort of dropping into some of the meetings.
Yeah.
So now and again, just kind of, not that I want to check in on them, just dropping in now and again into different, because I can see in Teams and in Zoom, you can see kind of the meetings that are happening throughout your organization. So now I make a conscious effort to just drop in to some of those meetings, whether it's my production team coming together or my marketing team, my sales team. And just by dropping in there, I found that I can create a similar moment, those moments of creativity or the spark or that, that happens. So I'm trying to make more of a conscious effort as a leader, just to drop in now and again, even though it's not planned. And there's something about doing that, like that water cooler moment, right? Like you mentioned, like when you bump into each other. But there's our particular meetings, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, that I feel like we have to have face-to-face. So, a few days in the month, I make a conscious effort with the team that we come together for those meetings, whether it be around innovation, whether it be about building our new product line for next year. And those type of meetings, I honestly do struggle to have in a virtual environment, because that spark and the energy and being together is very difficult to recreate virtually. I'm conscious of time and I'm getting told off by my producer. So before we wrap up, if there's for everyone listening, and it's amazing to have so many of you listening from all over the world. So thank you first and foremost. If there's sort of one parting piece of advice you could give to everyone listening, I know no one claims to have the magic bullet right now, but if there's one takeaway you want people to take away from this, kind of what would that be? I'll start with yourself, Matt.
Sure. I would just say this is a moment when we have a chance to fundamentally transform how our organizations think about learning and development in a way that's going to last well beyond the current crisis. And so I just encourage everyone to take some of the ideas that came out of the discussion today and think about how to get proactive about planning, not just for how we're going to get through these next few months, but how we're going to use this to fundamentally transform how we build skills, because it's only going to get more important, everything that we're talking about today, for all the trends that were happening even before COVID. And that's my biggest wish, that we just take advantage of this moment to really up our game in terms of developing the next generation of leaders.
Amazing. David?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Maybe I'll just offer three things, as my father would say, three things. And firstly, reinforce the point that Sergio was making. There's obviously a core set of foundation skills that we need to continue to develop depending on what your business is. But increasingly, you have to be enabling people to reskill and redevelop, and ability to take control of their own development. That's hugely, hugely important. And our role as learning leaders has to be to create that environment for people to develop themselves and do that. The second piece is harness the learnings that we've had this year about the opportunity to virtualize learning and collaborate through these types of environments. It's just accelerated it, and we can build off that. And the third thing is, don't lose what I think has happened in most places, this massive duty of care that leaders are having to show and demonstrate, and peers and colleagues and friends and teammates looking out for each other. And I think that's been an experience, certainly at the company I'm at now in Anglo, hugely caring for the people and the communities in which we work in. And I hope we continue to have that going forward.
Thank you, David. Sergio?
So I echo what my colleague said. First reflection I would like to say is the skills are really the currency of the future. Skills will determine the success or a failure of a company, the skills of the people, but also the success or the failure of us as individuals and as employees, as entrepreneurs. So take time to focus on your own skills and make sure that also you pass the message to the people that is important for them and for the company they work with, that they invest time on it. The second, about the L&D organization, and I like very much what Monique was saying before, stay close to the business. To the strategy, stay close to the business, because only working together we can have a sort of multiplicative effect for the company and more success. Are my two takeaway that I would like the people to take from me, and let's go with this journey. There is a lot of unknown in front of us, and what is important is that we feel safe to experiment, try, fail, and learn from the failure. This is absolutely key.
Love it, Sergio. Monique?
I would say two things. So when I started in the business, I noticed that the way it was thought about learning was very narrow. And when you open up the business leaders to learning is on the job in your communities and in your practices, and 10% is the formal one, you open up a wealth of opportunity where you can play. So I would highly suggest that when you think about learning, it can be also learning on the job and building communities. And the second one, I've benefited a lot from strong partnerships with other parts of the businesses, strategy, IT, the process excellence part, the business leaders, because that really helps to drive an integrated capability agenda. So build that strong relationships, start reaching out and understand what they're doing and how can you leverage them to make an impact with learning.
Love it. Last but not least, Andrew.
Thank you. I think the first thing is that maybe we should be cautious about talking about post-COVID. Perhaps we should prepare ourselves for coexistence with COVID in one form or another, on the basis that we might not find a cure. And then once we have that kind of idea in our head, we will then have to think about our particular space of expertise, which is learning and development. What are the implications for it? I think for me, one of the implications is, one of my favorite sayings is, we must stay a little bit more in the question. And what that means is that we must not jump to the conclusions or the solutions too quickly. We must remain curious enough to understand what exactly are we dealing with and what are the implications of that in terms of learning and development. I think staying in the question for me is a critical thing about how our people will remain curious about what does this new world really mean to us, and how does it mean, how does it forces us to think about learning and development very differently to what we have before, because it would be a total tragedy if we were to step up dealing with this new world with exactly the old mindset. That is not going to help us into the future.